Layoffs in the local news sector are, sadly, a regular occurrence, but the founders of Block Club Chicago decided they weren't going down without a fight. In November 2017, the news startup DNA Info laid off its entire staff, and it was only a few months later that 3 of its editors launched a Kickstarter that raised over $183,000. And they used that capital to launch Block Club Chicago, a nonprofit that seeks to put a journalist in each of the city's neighborhoods. Flash forward 6 years, and Block Club has a robust news gathering operation that's funded by 20,000 paying subscribers, foundation support, and a growing advertising business. In a recent interview, co-founder Stephanie Lulay walked me through the site's launch strategy, its unique approach to neighborhood-based reporting, and why she thinks Block Club's model can be replicated all across the US. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, have you ever wondered how I monetize this show? It's entirely reliant on subscriptions to my Substack newsletter. When you subscribe, you're able to book a half-hour introductory phone call with me. You also receive subscriber-only interviews with some of the world's most successful media entrepreneurs. Support the work I do here by subscribing at simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. And finally, if you're on the lookout for interviews with the world's most successful media entrepreneurs about how they built their businesses, then this is the show for you. So take a few moments to hit the subscribe button down below. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, Stephanie, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you co-founded a really successful local news outlet. It's called Block Club Chicago. What was your background in local news prior to that?
Yeah, Simon, my background is I was a local reporter and then became an editor. I was laid off like many journalists. The newsroom that I worked for, DNA Info at the time, here in Chicago.
Was that the first local newsroom you worked for?
No, yeah, we can back up all the way. Sorry. Yeah, I always knew that I wanted to be a journalist. For me, it kind of started at age 3. I would ask why about everything. Why? And my grandfather would always remark, "Does she ever shut up?" And I'm not sure that I have ever shut up and stopped wondering why. And that's really driven like my passion for journalism. Just it's such a gift to be able to learn about the world and what's going on in politics and our communities and all of that. And yeah, after graduating from University of Illinois, I did my undergrad and my master's there. My first job in local news was working for the Aurora Beacon News here in Illinois. That's our second largest city. I did a little bit of everything there, from covering schools and small towns to eventually having the top city hall beat covering politics in the city. Then I left to join DNA Info, which at the time was a startup looking to cover Chicago by neighborhood. It kind of flipped the beat system on its head. Instead of, having like a daily newsroom where you're focused on cops and courts and education, traditional beats, the reporters at DNA Info were focused on covering communities, like covering these neighborhood stories from the ground up. So I was very inspired by that mission and eager to join them. And I joined first as a reporter and a neighborhood reporter, and I eventually became a senior editor.
And DNA Info, it wasn't just in Chicago. There was also one in New York, correct?
There was also one in New York, and the billionaire Joe Ricketts that founded DNA Info also ended up buying LAist,
Gothamist Network, yeah.
the whole Gothamist network.
Yeah, I actually met the guy. I did like a presentation at the New York office about headlines or something like that, and he just happened to be there that day. So yeah, like you said, it was like really innovative in that it changed up the beat system rather than like you said, traditional local newspapers. If you have enough staffers, there will be a board of supervisors person, there will be an education reporter, a crime reporter, and stuff like that. But instead, it kind of broke up those beats in a different way of saying, here, these are the neighborhoods, and you need to be hyper specific, on this neighborhood. And like, how did that just manifest itself as like they just had that neighborhood specific stuff on the website, or were there ways so that, like, if I lived in a specific neighborhood, I could access just that information? Like, were there newsletters or social media accounts that were dedicated on the individual neighborhood level, or how did you kind of distribute that content?
Yeah, at DNA Info, that's exactly how it worked. We had newsletters that were, dedicated just to certain neighborhoods, and Facebook pages. Facebook was big back then. Facebook pages dedicated just to certain neighborhoods and serving those neighbors. And our goal there was just really to be writing about what the neighbors cared about. In a city as large as Chicago, when you are the one like cops reporter, let's say in a newsroom, there's a lot going on a crime beat every day, right? Or if you're the one education reporter, same thing. There's a lot going on citywide, education wise. And it was our goal just to always be writing about what the neighbors cared about from the ground up, and to get to those stories first by continuously serving those neighbors and building connections with them.
Yeah, but like at the same time, there are obviously, cities are centralized. How did it handle that centralization? Because like obviously there are edicts that are going out at the school wide level. So like how did you balance that? Like, you want to obviously cover the local school in that neighborhood, but obviously there are things coming up from up high that are going to affect that one school. And then obviously you don't want to write the same story five times about five different school. I don't know, like, how did you approach that kind of more centralized beat reporting?
Yeah, I think key to that, to tackling those central beats, is we did have some central beats, like we had a city hall reporter at DNA Info. Um, a lot of how we tackled that at DNA Info though was cross newsroom collaboration. If there are two reporters noticing that this is an issue popping up that's going to affect the whole city, they would team up to show different perspectives of how it's affecting the neighborhoods, but across the city.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
was the plan, and we'll talk about what happened with DNA Info, but was like the plan for it to be like an advertising supported organization?
Yes. It was a free site. And the bet was that we could get people to support this neighborhood news mission with advertising, but specifically like neighborhood focused advertising. So there was a whole sales team that mimicked the neighborhood reporter footprint. So, like for instance, I covered Pilsen and the West Loop for a while. There was also a West Loop and Pilsen focused ad manager, for
Wow.
example.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so obviously you can say, one way you could say it is the experiment didn't work out. The other thing is you could say maybe Joe pulled out prematurely, but I think like the series of events were that somebody, maybe it was the whole DNA Info newsroom, or maybe it was just the New York newsroom. They announced that they were going to unionize, and he very quickly decided that he was just going to shut down the entire DNA Info network, and I think the Gothamist network, like, completely at the same time. Is that kind of the gist of what happened?
That's exactly what happened. I was on Fox, our local Fox channel, earlier that day talking about DNA Info stories. I got back to my desk and we all were told um, that our website had gone blank and that it would be replaced with a letter from Joe Ricketts. And that letter from Joe Ricketts was public facing, just said that he given the New York office's decision to unionize, that he would no longer be that he was shuttering DNA Info and its affiliates.
Yeah, and that was a very weird move for him to like on the same day he was closing it down just to shut down the website. Like what was the strategic advantage of that, you know? Or do you think that was just out of spite or like
I don't I don't listen, it's there's not much value in speculating. I don't know if it was spite or not. I think it's entirely probable that they didn't understand, again, they're not journalists, that they didn't understand what this would mean to the staff. In fact, like, very, pretty quickly, they did, put the archives back up, and, made plans for that. I do think it's a possibility that they just didn't understand to journalists what an archive of our work means.
Mhm. So he did that. I forget how much time went by, but this was after this, you know, all the staff had been laid off. But like a bunch of public radio stations banded together and bought the Gothamist network. Did they buy DNA Info too, or did they get the assets of DNA Info, or what was it?
Yeah, so this actually happens after,
After Block
uh
Club Chicago has already
yes.
started, so it's not. This didn't really have any relevance to you, except in one small way. But I just wanted to make sure I understood what happened to that whole
Yeah, yeah.
network.
So yes, I can kind of, uh, we one thing that we were fortunate is we did get severance, so we had a little bit of runway, to start talking about what's next, right? Whether we're going to go get jobs in other newsrooms or quit journalism, or and like something interesting that happened in the meantime is we started hearing from readers all across the city just saying, encouraging us not to give up and just saying how much they needed this neighborhood coverage and they couldn't get it anywhere else. And, we looked around in the meantime to see in the city, like, was a newsroom going to pick up this mantle? Like, do this kind of neighborhood focused reporting? And Simon, it really didn't happen. And that really led to us, thinking seriously about starting something. And it was pretty fast. DNA Info shuttered in November 2017. By February 2018, we had announced that we were forming a new newsroom called Block Club Chicago that would be focused on Chicago's neighborhoods. And that day we launched a Kickstarter too, so people could support us right away.
And
Um,
and when you say
yeah.
we, what does that mean? Like, was it just all the former staffers DNA Info? Was it a small number of staffers? Like, who else was it?
Yeah, DNA was big, so, like, we knew that there was no possible way that we could get enough public support day one for us all to have full-time jobs, like we did at DNA Info. So what we did is, our 3 co-founders, me, myself, Jen Sabella, and Seamus Toomey, who were all editors, at DNA Info, got together, with 5 reporters, and we decided to launch it small and to see if we could build it sustainably from a small newsroom that we could support, to build it back slowly and sustainably, especially considering the current, and former and environment and media then and now.
Yeah. And so, did you decide right? I mean, did you decide prior to it launching that it was going to be a nonprofit?
Yeah, we did a lot of we're journalists. That's like one thing that was, different. We understand journalism, and so we did a lot of research, just on for-profit models, nonprofit models. Talked to a lot of leaders in, the nonprofit news movement about the advantages, and yes, decided to go nonprofit. We actually ended up at the time we were also, talking to another newsroom about potentially housing this operation within that newsroom. We had talked to a venture capitalist who was very interested in this model. So we really did, um, explore a lot of different avenues before settling on, forming this as a nonprofit.
And then also, you had like part of as like getting off the ground. You partnered with, I think I could be wrong about this, but an organization called Civil. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, no, you're getting this right. Yeah, shout out Civil. Civil was trying to launch journalism on the blockchain. It was a very ambitious plan, but one thing that they were doing at the time that they needed is they needed newsrooms to test out this journalism on the blockchain, kind of to be partners in what they were doing. And it was like perfect timing for us. It also was perfect timing for some other newsrooms that have flourished since then. Um, Especially like I documented New York, like also was, out came out of that experiment.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of news organizations that benefited from this like bubble that happened, basically, even though
Y
it started
Yeah,
to
for
crash.
sure, even though we're foreshadowing Civil didn't work, it didn't work out, it failed, but all of these newsrooms, because of the pretty much no strings attached investment they made in us, they didn't care if we were for profit or a nonprofit, they just wanted us to do good journalism with their investment. Because of that, it really gave us the seed funding to start up, coupled with the money that we raised from the Kickstarter campaign. We actually broke a record for most funded local newsroom at the time on Kickstarter. And yeah, so those two coupled together really gave us the seed funding to do this. It wasn't from like one foundation. I think we see that a lot with newsrooms starting up with $10 million already in the bank. This was not that. It was very scrappy.
Yeah, and just before you talk about the Kickstarter, so like Civil, the way that it worked, this is ancient history now, but I think it
Mhm.
offered an ICO, initial coin
Yes.
offering, which is kind of like a precursor to NFTs, where it would basically launch a new like crypto coin that people could buy. And I guess the theory was is the coin would kind of act almost like a stock price, and that it would like the value of buying the coin is if your media organization succeeded, the value of your coin that you're the coin that you had bought from that crypto launch would go up. So you had like a sudden flood of crypto investors giving you money because they were buying coins and technically sort of kind of investing in you, even though they didn't really own equity. All they owned were these coins. Is that kind of like the gist of it?
Yeah. And like investing in the platform, there were all these high hopes for the platform that you would be able to use your coins to vote on certain things. And it really was ambitious and an interesting plan. I'll say that.
And then how much from the ICO? How much did you raise just through that?
Oh, we didn't. Okay, no, we did not raise money from the ICO at
Oh,
all.
so
Civil did. That was like entirely.
oh, so
We're
you didn't get any tangent. You didn't get any real
no,
benefit from that affiliation, other than maybe
no.
some free
In fact,
press or something.
I'm not even sure that the ICO was successful. To be honest,
Oh, okay. I
yeah, yeah,
assumed
yeah.
that you got like a big flood of money. So
No
even though that failed, it like at least gave you some startup capital. So your startup capital came mainly through the Kickstarter.
cash. The Kickstarter, but also a Civil invested cash in us.
Oh,
Yes,
interesting. So
they
not to
made like
dwell
a
on this dead thing
yeah
now because obviously it doesn't really matter. But like, what did they get in exchange for the cash?
us. They got us being affiliate, we were trusted journalists who were trying this out for them, right? Like and thinking through the tech with them. Yeah, but really, Simon, I understand why you have questions because it was a great deal for us.
Yeah.
I'll just say
So
that.
how much
Um,
cash did they give you?
about $1 million
Oh
all said and
wow,
done. Yeah,
nice.
but it was like over a year, 18 months. Like it was over
Nice. Okay, so you did benefit from that or that affiliation at least. So, and then the Kickstarter, you raised like $180,000. Is that
Yeah,
roughly correct?
$183,000, we raised from 3,100 backers.
And what were kind of what were the different tiers and stuff like? What were people donate? Were they just doing it to support you, or were they getting something out of that?
Yeah, it was really a range, from our lowest tier was like get the tote bag, I think for $25. Our most popular was people could subscribe, get a first 1 year subscription. for $50 instead of the $59 list price and the tote bag. So it was a good deal, and a lot of people did it. And then, we had other, some local artists create interesting like merch for some higher tiers. We had a party with a bunch of Kickstarter backers um, at a local brewery for like the $500 tier. So yeah, shout out to like the local businesses too. They were key in supporting us getting this off the ground.
And so you have like, over $1 million in kind of startup capital. So what did the staff look like when you launched in February 2018? How big was it?
See, Simon, we did not have a million. I mean, we did get $1 million,
Oh, but it
but
was
it's like
spread out. It was
paid
spread out. Okay. Yeah.
payroll
Yeah. Yeah.
as, you know what
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of how that worked. So yes, so we launched with three co-founding editors, myself, Jen Sabella, and Seamus Toomey, who had all been editors at DNA Info, and five reporters. So like I said, we had to kind of scale back what we could support. And because of that, we weren't able to cover like the entire city. We focused on some key neighborhood clusters that we knew did really what we really had forged relationships in at DNA Info and would really support us at Block Club.
So you weren't trying to comprehensively cover the whole city at first.
No, because that's like the opposite, that's the opposite of what we believe neighborhood news should be. So instead, we decided to go small, focus on a couple of different neighborhood clusters, but spread out across the city. Like we did have beats on the north side and the south side, and yeah, that's how we launched.
So I don't know if Joe Ricketts came up with this idea, but so then the legacy of that idea lived on, and that the Block Club Chicago was taking some of those insights about neighborhood level coverage and kind of replicating that, basically.
Yeah, and we really like we're listening to our readers. Like I said, Simon, that's they reached out to us and said we can't, we need this neighborhood coverage, and they would say to us too, why didn't you just ask us to pay? We would have paid for it. We um pay for a neighborhood, or we pay for like a newspaper subscription. This isn't a lot different. So they really inspired us to look at how we could, potentially support this in alternative ways too.
Yeah, and at some point, I don't know how far into the future it was. What I mentioned before was those public radio stations bought the assets of DNA Info and Gothamist, and then basically just donated those social media accounts and email lists to you, right?
Yes, so WNYC acquired all of that, all of the DNA Info assets, all of the Gothamist network assets, and they sold some of them off to other, like LAist went to the public radio station in LA, DCist went to WAMU, right? Yeah. Um,
Gothamist with the
so
WNYC, yeah.
exactly. There was one kind of interesting outlier. There, Chicagoist was bought by Chance the Rapper, who's our local rapper hero here. So, but yeah,
Is it still going?
it never restarted. And people still ask us about that all the time. What happened to Chicagoist? But yeah. So I'm not sure if we reached out first. I think they reached out to us saying, would you want um, would it be possible to donate the DNA Info assets to you? These are um, l- subscriber lists, especially like that you built up over, like a list of 100,000 email subscribers that you built up over 5 years at DNA Info. Can we donate these assets back to you? Part of the condition was too that we would keep the archives alive, the DNA Info archives alive, and we have to this day. So, yeah, so we got all of our email list, all of our old social accounts back, all of that we could reignite, which was really exciting. And in turn, like we helped some other people with it too. The city in New York, when they were launching, we helped them with the DNA, with some emails, um, to launch their newsletters too.
Yeah. So you launched in 2018. What were some of the early wins in terms of just like signs that this was obviously the earliest win was that Kickstarter campaign, but the first huge signal that like Chicagoans wanted this. But like in terms of just like stories that really kind of took off or changed the narrative, like what were some of the like really early wins that you were like, okay, this is really getting traction and this is working?
Yeah, I would say, like, the Kickstarter was, like, the pivotal moment. I remember having internal spirited, disagreements amongst us co-founders about how much, because on Kickstarter, you have to raise a certain amount or you don't get the money, right? Um, we had, like, a lot of debate about what our minimum raise should be, and I remember I think we set it at $25,000, right? Um, we that first day, we surpassed that, like, within 3 hours, and within 36 hours, we had raised $100,000 and promised to hire a 6th reporter because of that. Just seeing that, like, enormous reaction out of the gates from people all across the city, and there was huge buzz around it too, like, we were on a ton of TV stations, like, just like all of the media was writing about it. National media started to pick up the story. And listen, it's a good story. I mean, it's a good story. Like, um, we were laid off and we dusted ourselves off and got back to work. So I think like the national media really rallied around our story too. But so many other people have the same story. It was an interesting time in media that people weren't just getting laid off and going out to pasture. They were really seeing the opportunity in what we could rebuild, right? So that, and then also one of our earliest stories that really took off, about a year after our founding, we we broke the news about an alligator in a lagoon here in Chicago, which is not alligators are not native to
Yeah, that
Illinois.
must have been released there.
Yeah, we think it was like a dumped off pet, but, it's, that story touched off like it was the story of the summer. All everybody, like, national media was descending on Chicago to cover it. And we, held a contest naming him Chance the Snapper. We had a very successful merch campaign around it, raising $100,000 to our newsroom. So that was another, like, key moment that I would say, like, people really let us know that they liked what we were doing.
To kind of get back to the one lesson you heard that you had about like all the coverage you got, I feel like that's like one piece of advice I'm giving um, to laid off journalists that like
Yeah,
you're starting to see these writer cooperatives launching and stuff like that in the wake of mass layoffs and stuff like that, and that's like really the perfect time to launch something like that, especially if it's multiple people from an outlet
yeah,
that's been laid off, is because there's this period of time where there's just like a lot of public sympathy and stuff like that and bemoaning losing these like news resources, and you can actually get a lot of people excited about you launching some new outlet if you're kind of banding together and being like, okay, we have X number of months severance, let's see if we can like do something on
mhm,
our own rather than go apply for new jobs. And that's kind of what you saw when like the folks left Vice right before it collapsed and launched 404 Media, when
yeah,
all the editors resigned from Defector and
yes,
Deadspin and
Deadspin, right?
launched Defector. I think that like there is something about this where if you can time it correctly, you'll get tons of people sharing. And the same thing happened when DC is shut down. Several of their editors launched a new nonprofit local news outlet.
51st.
Yeah, so it's just I think there's a lesson to be learned there about how to kind of time and kind of position yourself, launching one of these news outlets. But so you got some early reporting wins. So like what happened? So kind of as time went on, how do you raise this initial money? How did it become a more mature news organization where you had a more consistent funding source and then also began hiring out and started reporting in more neighborhoods?
Yeah, so in the early days, we were really focused on just building sustainably. So, like, if we can raise the money, we hire more reporters, we cover more neighborhoods. That was the focus, right? And we, I mentioned that we had about 3,000 subscribers just from that Kickstarter, give or take, even before we launched. So we announced that Kickstarter in February, and then we launched the news site in June of 2018. So the next like couple years, we really were just like on an all-out sprint to build subscribers. That really was like our focus. Even though we were a nonprofit, we were seeking foundation support. We knew that if this was going to work, we had to get subscribers to support us at $59, a month or sorry, $6 a month or $59 a year. Like that's how this was going to be built. And so over time, we just kept building and building and building. We got to 10,000 subscribers. We got to 15,000 subscribers each time, adding, onboarding new neighborhoods and hiring new neighborhood reporters to cover them. Each time we did that, our audience grew because we were bringing back that coverage to people who, could support us again because we were tapped in on their what's happening in their communities. So it really like fueled each other. Like each time we added a reporter, we added more subscribers. And today we have about 20,000 paid subscribers, or members. Um, Despite our site being like we're a freemium model, most of our news is free. All of our breaking news is free. All of our South and West Side coverage is free. All of our election coverage is free. During, all of our public health coverage is free. So, as you can imagine, during coronavirus, or during the COVID-19 pandemic, the height of it, basically everything that we wrote was free. Uh,
So
yeah,
just to break down some of what you're talking about. So,
yeah,
I talk to a lot of, local news entrepreneurs on this podcast. A lot of them start with large donors, large grants and stuff like that, and then they try to, basically bring on small donors, small members and stuff like that to kind of round out and kind of diversify.
yeah,
It sounds like you were very heavily focused early on in being funded largely by individual small
yes.
contributions. And so you say you had you have 20,000 subscribers. Is that,
Mhm.
are those members like, or is that like an actual subscription strategy where you said it's a freemium model? What's kind of the carrot and the stick in terms of like enticing people to convert into a subscriber paying $60 a year?
A good 90% of our coverage is free, but you will be asked to subscribe. There's certain things that are premium content, right? Like our development coverage, some of our government and politics coverage, just because it is so specialized. And, that's how we really encourage people to subscribe. On top of our ongoing, messaging that this is just uh, we are serving you in your neighborhoods, and this is some very unique um, value that we're giving you as a newsroom. You can't get these stories anywhere else, and you should subscribe, or you should donate to support us because that's what's going to keep this coverage that's so vital to your community going. And I think honestly, our best ambassadors for this are our reporters. Like just being out in the communities every day, they show up to meetings day in, day out. They really get to know people. It's a lot easier to support um, the news, I think, local news, when you see the person who's serving you all the time, right? Like out in the community. It's a lot more real to people, I think. And that's an easier, it's easier to say, I'm going to, skip my coffee today and kick in to support this local news site that's really important to me.
And
And
for that stuff that's behind the paywall, is that like a hard paywall that they're just hitting that and in order?
yes, but you would have to be. Simon, you'd have to be reading us a lot to hit it.
So
So
what do you
I
mean?
do
What
think
do you
like
mean you
an
would have to be reading a lot because it's metered?
yes,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, I do think too that I do think a majority of the people who give to us and support us, they give because they think it's important, and this is like a vital mission to them,
So they're
right?
the
Like this.
paywall isn't necessarily converting that many people. It's because you were also putting in messaging around this. You need to
Right.
support this and fund our work. Basically, are you doing like like fundraising drives or anything? Like, is it all just a is it a constant drumbeat, or is there like dedicated fundraising drives that you have scheduled throughout the year?
It constant drumbeat, with dedicated drives. We always do a big campaign in the summer around our birthday. Like each year that we've existed it's big to us, right? So each summer, we do a big drive. We always do an end of year holiday drive, that it's a pretty cool promotion. Our readers really like this. We partner with a local artist who has done these beautiful prints of landmarks and neighborhoods all over the city. Yeah, he's done these beautiful landmarks of like basically like you can get your neighborhood print when you subscribe to us, and we like offer more than 50. Chicago is really a city of neighborhoods, so people love that. So that's a great incentive, like holiday gift for people to give every year and to subscribe at that time. Yeah, like those are our biggest campaigns. We just did a great one, giving people the opportunity to support a local books nonprofit, giving books to Chicago Public School students, timed with back to school, so people could subscribe and donate books at the same time. People really liked that. Yeah, so like we're really just not afraid to try things too, and to ask people like a lot of different ways to support us.
And do you have anybody on your staff that's focused on courting like large donors and or writing, applying for grants and stuff like that?
Yes, we do. Uh, Thanks to the American Journalism Project, they have funded several revenue focused positions here at Block Club. So we have somebody that is just focused on foundation grants. We have somebody that is just focused on major gifts. We have someone that is just focused on membership. We have somebody that is just focused. We actually advertising. We've gotten advertising off the ground, really um, focused on that. That's been so successful. We have 2 staffers now that are just focused on advertising.
Like
So,
calling up businesses and selling ads.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes.
And what kind
We've
of ads are
always
you offering? What kind of like formats?
Yeah, one thing that, certainly like site ads, but I would say our most popular is our neighborhood newsletters. Like we are just able to target, advertisers can really get their message out there to certain neighborhoods, with our neighborhood newsletters, and there's really nothing like it that exists in our city. Like there's no other way to in this targeted newsletter way to just like reach neighbors of Logan Square, for example. Like it's our advertisers really love those targeted newsletters.
Yeah, so if you go on your website, there's like a newsletters section and you can opt in to whatever neighborhood you want. It says the neighborhood, but it also says the reporter, I
Yeah.
guess, who's writing that newsletter. So is it part of that reporter's duties to, in addition to just the standard reporting that goes on the website, to also put out the newsletter? And are they writing like original content for the newsletter, or is it just a roundup of news, or like what's the kind of approach with the newsletters?
Yeah, with their editor, they're curating that newsletter. So they are deciding what the lead story is. They are deciding like what other information should go into it. We not only feature our own stories, but also if there's another news outlet in town that has a great story about that neighborhood, we want to feature that too. We really want those newsletters to be like, I can read this and know everything that's going on in my neighborhood. And then they also write a top to it. They write a little letter up top. and it could be an anecdote from their reporting. It could be a deeper look into, a story that they wrote, or like a behind the scenes, like went into a story. It could be see you at the farmers market this weekend. But people really, our readers really like those because they're so personal. They're really getting to know their reporter. And another thing that they really like about it is the newsletters are two-way streets. So all they have to do is hit reply, and they will, to reach their neighborhood reporter, maybe with a tip or some help with reporting, or it really gives them a way to interact and be a part of our reporting too.
And are those going out daily?
Our neighborhood newsletters are twice weekly. They're all sent twice weekly. And then we have a daily morning newsletter, and then a daily afternoon newsletter. And then we have some topical focused newsletters too. Like we have a twice weekly arts and culture newsletter.
And in terms of like the pie graph of revenue of small donors, large donors slash grants slash advertising, what's that pie graph look like?
Yeah, so when Block Club launched, we were, and really into the early years before the American Journalism Project invested in us, we were we were 70% funded by our readers. 70% of our funding was coming just straight from readers. And the balance was foundation support, a tiny bit of advertising, some events, some merch. That has really changed in recent years just because of some large investments. That the American Journalism Project has made in us, but also the McCormick Foundation also made a large commitment to us to launch an investigative team here focused on the South and West sides. So today, we foundations make up a larger chunk of our support than they did in the past, but also so does advertising. Advertising is like a growing chunk of our pie. Subscribers remain a very strong revenue stream for us. And then also increasingly, events. And we just held a huge Black Club block party here in Chicago, a free event for all of our readers. It was awesome. And merchandise, like I mentioned, we've had some pretty innovative, successful pushes with merchandise. Not anything like huge, but raising $100,000 from a Gator Watch shirt does certainly help our bottom line.
That's like a kind of a really good idea that I guess now that I think of it, I've heard of other news organizations doing, but I feel like um, more could copy is working with local artists to make
Yes.
merch that is locally themed. Like I've come
Yes.
across prints in like DC neighborhoods and stuff, and I've never bought any, but I've thought about buying them. But like you could see the appeal of that. You could even share revenue with the artist, so they get X number
Yes.
of dollars when it's buying it, and that's just something that's like you could see because like obviously every media organization sells merch that just has their logo on it, but like if you
Right.
can kind of create like actual real local content on that merch, I feel like that's like a huge driver in terms of incentivizing someone to become a member or something like that. um and then you also, do you create a podcast?
Yeah, we do. We have a podcast that is focused on local news. John Hansen hosts that. Specifically, like it launched really focused on good news. We just wanted to like highlight good news stories that we were doing. That's so key to our mission too. Chicago really is demonized in the national media, and you don't hear a lot about the good things happening here. We know from the Black Level Up, there are so many things that our neighbors are doing to make our city a great and better place to live. And the podcast really launched to put a spotlight on those stories that we were already doing, but in a podcast format. It was super, when it launched, it was super popular, and it really has with feedback from our readers, it really has morphed into a podcast that is just more generally focused on the news in our stories, not just these good news stories.
Yeah, if you watch only Fox News, Chicago is a dystopian hellscape. So like how does like the podcast fit strategically into like how do you think it helps you? Is it just like obviously, people who listen to it, they get value out of it, but like do you sell advertising against it? Do you think it helps, with fundraising, or what's the kind of thinking of how it fits in?
We sell advertising against it, yes, and we are having success at that. But the reason that we launched a podcast is we just want to we know not everybody reads the news on a website like I do. You know, we know from studies that have been done here in Chicago, particularly on the south and west sides, the majority of people get their news from TV news, actually. And that's also a reason why we have our own TV show too. We partnered with WCIU, a local affiliate here, and we produce a once weekly news program, like kind of TV magazine style. That's all. It's called Block. It's called On the Block, powered by Block Club Chicago, and it's all focused on our stories. Our reporters are featured in it, and it's uh, it's not something that I've seen like done a lot of other places. And one thing that we're really excited about is it's not just exposure for us and not just getting our stories out and to new readers that might not be aware of Black Club Chicago, but WCIU also pays us for that partnership. It is a revenue generator to our newsroom.
And that's on like public access television or something?
No, it's WCIU is like a it's not public access. It's a locally owned broadcaster.
Okay, so it goes over like the broadcast channel, so it can be found on linear TV. Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah. And then you mentioned live events. Is it just like what's the kind of strategy there?
Yeah, we just wanna be especially post 2020, 2021, where the world really shut down and we were so disconnected from each other. We just want to be creating ways for our neighbors to be gathering and interacting with us and our reporters in real life and each other, by the way. Like, just, ways for us to get together, share ideas, all of that. So we have a ton of we're doing quite a bit around events, whether that's just like meetups at the local bar to meet your new reporter, um, or like member meetups, right? Or we have a block club. I always like this trips me up when I say it. We have our own block club book club. Thank you. Um, where we highlight local artists and bring them together, and they're interviewed, they're interviewed by our reporters. And those events have like really run the gamut too. It could just look like a book talk, a kind of a Q&A. But we also recently had there was a new book that came out about beer hikes, like hikes around breweries, and we went on a beer hike with our readers, and it was super popular. We're doing our next um, Black Club Book Club event. There's a new book out about Malort. That is our famous liquor here in Chicago. It's horrible if
Yeah,
you've ever
it's
had
pretty
it.
nasty. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a whole event around Malort and that new book too that we're really excited about. So that we also do, an annual fundraising event. In the past, that's looked more like a little bit more like a gala or an anniversary type event. This year, we decided to kind of flip that on its head, and we did this big block party focused on highlighting local music, local vendors, local food, local beer, and local news. And it was really successful. We had 2,500 people come in the door. Our This was our first like fest of that size, and Yeah, we just want to create ways for people to um, get with each other, but also learn about Block Club, learn about what we're doing, and meet their local neighborhood reporter. Find ways to get involved with us.
Was it called the Block Club Block Party?
Yes, yes.
So, what do you think? Like, looking at all that you've done, like, how replicable do you think this could be in terms of obviously we're facing this huge upheaval in local news. Legacy newspapers are in retrenchment. Obviously, there are lots of these kind of small startups that are launching nonprofit and for profit. Do you think that like you could like literally copy and paste this across a lot of different cities?
Yes, I do. I don't think it's going to I think that this is very replicable. I don't think it's going to look exactly like it does here in Chicago, and it shouldn't. But with that said, a lot of the newsrooms that we were talking about earlier that have had success at this, they share with us and we share with them. Several of them we shared kind of our playbook ahead of launching, and I definitely think that there are all lessons that we can learn from each other. One would be we have to tell our story and we have to tell it a lot. um you know People don't know these things. They don't know how bad the situation is in media. They don't know that people are getting laid off. They don't know that news deserts are popping up every day. It seems like they should know because we're all talking about it a lot, but they really aren't aware. So we have to tell our story a lot. We have to be like ready to ask regular people for help. And that can be uncomfortable as a journalist, but I think people are really coming around to, we have to have our readers support us. We need their buy-in if local news is going to survive.
And I forgot to ask you, how big is your staff now, approximately?
Oh yeah, that's a great question because that's something I'm happy to talk. Yeah. So we launched in 2018 with 8 staffers. Today 6 years later, we have a full-time staff of 37 journalists and our financial team that, makes sure that we all get paid.
And you now have journalists in every single neighborhood in Chicago.
Not every single neighborhood. We do still have some gaps, not many, but we are still working to fill in holes on the map. And I should say that our foundations have here in Chicago have played a huge role in stepping up to support those. There are foundations that specifically support certain beats. Particularly across the south and west sides, underserved areas of the city that, long or never have been served well by the media.
Okay, Stephanie, those are all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
You can find us at blockclubshy.org to learn about our mission. You can also follow me, or you can follow us on X. I still call it Twitter, at Block Club Shy. And if you're trying to find me, I'm at Slulay, Slulay 2 on X.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much, Simon.